Hello everyone and welcome back. So today we're going to be creating some additional blocks and items to kind of show off a few different techniques and also to add some more things so that we can work with recipes and tags. Because right now we only have a single block, so not a whole lot we can do with that. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and copied a couple of assets from another mod of mine. So we're going to be adding ruby and sapphire. We're going to be adding blocks of them, ores, and the items themselves. And you may be able to see on the left here, and I'm sorry if the text size is a bit small right now. I will go into presentation mode when we start writing the code, but I've gone ahead and copied over all the textures, the models, the block state files, and everything here. So that'll all be on the GitHub, which link is in the video description. And of course I've already updated the lang file here, so our blocks are going to be block of gem, our ores is just gem ore, and then the gems themselves are just the name of the gem. And we're also going to be adding an item group, what was previously called a creative tab. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just create this in our main mod class. If your mod has multiple item groups, you may want to create a separate class to hold those, just so that they're in one nice, easy to access place. But in most cases, I'll just create an item group right in the main mod class, since we only need one. And just call that item group. And item group is actually an abstract class. So we'll have to override one method, which is create icon. The constructor also takes a label parameter, which I typically pass in mod ID if it's the only one we've got. And for create icon, since the only thing we have right now is the blue stone block, I guess we can use that. So you just return a new item stack there, and don't forget a semicolon after that last curly brace. And there's our item group. So now let's go to mod items, and we need to, I'm going to change this to, no, it's not what I was thinking. Yeah, it's mod blocks that has a default item here, so we can go ahead and change that to our own item group. Like that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and we're going to be creating an enum, and I'll call this gem. And this is where we're going to be storing references to our new blocks and items. So this is a technique I've used fairly often. If you've got a lot of similar blocks or items, it can be good to use an enum to basically hold on to references of those. And as you'll see in a minute, this also makes adding new variants very easy. So in the case of my mod Silence Gems, there are 48 total gems. So they're all in an enum, and that enum also stores references to all blocks and items made out of those gems. And that makes registering them much easier, because I think the mod has something like 800 blocks and items. It's a very large number. So in this case, we're just adding ruby and sapphire, and adding additional gem types in this case would be as easy as adding a new enum constant. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put our blocks and items in a lazy load base. This is something I believe I've talked about before. The lazy load base will take a supplier object, and it will call that supplier to create the object the first time we need it. So this is kind of nice because we won't be class loading a bunch of stuff the moment this enum, something touches this enum. We don't want to necessarily create our blocks and items until a bit later on. So for now, let's just do the block and item, and we'll need to do the ore in a minute. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a constructor for this. So our block is the storage block. So we're going to say new lazy load base, and a supplier is, we can write a lambda expression that takes no parameters, which means empty parentheses. And then that produces a new block. And you could subclass block if you needed to. We will probably be doing that for the ores in a moment. And we'll need to create a new block.properties and give this material.iron. And we also want to set hardness and resistance to 5, 6. And go ahead and set the sound to soundtype.metal as well. And for the item, doing something very similar. So just a new item. Again, you could subclass it if you needed to. And we will be setting our item group here. And as I've done before, you could break up these lines a little bit if you wanted to. The way I typically do it would be something like this. But for now, I think I'll just leave it as one line. So now I want to add some methods to get the block and the item, and there's one other method I'm going to be adding. One thing I'd like to point out is if your enum has only a single item for each constant, one thing you could potentially do is you could implement iItemProvider. And what iItemProvider does is it has a single method, asItem, which returns an item, and this interface can be found on blocks and items. And of course it's showing all the blocks and items. And the iItemProvider is nice because the item stack constructor takes an iItemProvider. So if you implement this on something, you can pass your enum constants directly into an item stack constructor, for instance. Unfortunately, in this case, that won't really work because we've got multiple things that our enum is representing. So let's go ahead and create those methods. The first is going to be one that I'm going to call getName. And in this case, we're going to take the enum constant name and lowercase it, and make sure to pass in locale.root to make sure that the results are consistent on all machines. Otherwise, some locales lowercase letters differently. I believe Turkish has a dotless lowercase I that it will create if you don't add the locale.root, and that will cause crashes. I've had that happen before. Alright, and now let's add one to getBlock, and again, the block in this case is the storage block. If you wanted to call that storage block just to make it clear, that might be fine. Actually, I think I'll go ahead and rename those to storage block in just a moment. So what we want to do here is call block.getValue, and this will take the lazy load base and get value. It will first grab the supplier, and if the supplier is null or not null, it will create the value from the supplier. Then it will set the supplier to null, and then return the value. So then after the first time this is called, supplier is going to be null. It'll skip this block and just return the cached value. Okay, and finally, we're going to do getItem and return item.getValue. So let's go ahead and rename block to storage block, just to make sure that the code is clear. So Shift F6 can be used to rename things in IntelliJ. I'm going to call that storage block, and it's going to offer to rename the getter as well. So yes, that is what I want. I didn't even know it would do that, so that's nice. So our getter is now called getStorageBlock. And I guess I could maybe rename item to gemItem, just so that's clear as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually register these blocks and items. So back in our mod block class, may look a bit different since I've added all the Java doc and comments, but in the register all method, let's go at the end, and what we're going to do is we're going to iterate over all the values of that enum constant. So we're going to say for gem in gem.values, we are going to do the following. We are going to register a new block. This is going to be a storage block. So the name of our block is going to be gem.getName plus underscore block. And that will produce something like Ruby underscore block, sapphire underscore block. And then we need to give it the block itself. And that is going to be gem.getStorageBlock. And we can use the default item block, so that's all we need to do there. And like I said earlier, adding new gems in this case would be as simple as adding a new enum constant. No need to modify any of the code here. Just add a new constant and it'll register a new block. And same thing with the items. We need to iterate over those and register the gem items. So register, and in this case, it's just going to be gem.getName and gem.getGemItem. So the names of these will be Ruby and Sapphire, like that. And as you may remember from when we created this class originally, this is automatically creating a resource location with that name as the path. So of course the full name is going to be tutorial:ruby and tutorial:sapphire. So now let's go ahead and just run this. I know we haven't added the ORs yet. Okay, so keeping an eye out for any model errors down here, although it should be fine since I've actually tried recording this one once, so if you thought that the code went a bit more smoothly this time, that's why. So yeah, I was originally going to add green sapphire as well, but I thought, nah, it's just extra work for no particular reason. Alright, what was that invalid statistics? Oh yeah, so that was just from the blocks that I removed. Okay. Okay, so yeah, there's the removed block right there. And just to make sure, yep, harvestability is working correctly. Sound effects are correct. It's making the metal sound. I don't know how well you can hear that. And then we've got the items themselves. Okay, so let's go ahead and add an OR block. So in this case, I think it might actually be good to subclass block. Let me actually see. So the vanilla block OR class, which is what most of the ORs are, if you see here in get item dropped, it's just kind of hard coded for each particular case. So not a very good way of doing it, and we can't really make any use of this. Let me actually pull up something from one of my mods. Okay, so this is Silence Gems. This mod's on GitHub, on my GitHub as well. So I created a block here. I did subclass block OR. Not entirely sure, but I guess we'll do that. And I'm storing a reference to the item I want to drop. And there's a bit more to this class, but let's go ahead and base our code off of this. So we don't have a block package yet. Let's go ahead and create that. And what do we call this? I'll just call it or block. Okay, so as before, I'm going to extend block or, and I kind of prefer the naming convention with things like block and item on the end. You're free to use whatever naming convention you like. So, need to create a constructor matching super. And I usually remove the properties from my constructors because those don't normally change. I guess we could have two constructors just as an example. So let's actually come back to that other one. So we want an item provider dropped item. And so in the class I showed before, I'm also taking in a harvest level parameter. So something else it could do, but let's keep it simple in this case. So let's make a private final item provider dropped item and assign that in the constructor. So kind of a basic Java thing, but always make sure you have the this dot when assigning fields in the constructor. In this case, that's necessary because the parameter has the same name. You could give the parameter a different name. Personally, I always just use this in constructors, just so it's absolutely clear what's going on. Okay, and for our other constructor, it's just going to be an item provider. And we're going to call the other constructor, pass it dropped item, and properties.create. And we're going to use material.rocks since it's an OR. And what do we want for hardness and resistance? I need to have a cheat sheet of hardness and resistance values. I can never remember them. Let me see what have I used? Okay, it looks like we want 3. I'll go with 3, 4, the same thing that Gems uses for its ores. Actually, what does vanilla use? That's going to bother me. Vanilla uses 3, 3 for diamond. What else? Emerald is 3, 3. Nether quartz 3, 3. Where's iron? 3, 3. Okay, so yeah, all the vanilla ores are 3, 3. So I'll go ahead and mimic that. Okay, so there are a few methods that we want to override here. One is get experience drop. Then we need get harvest level. And finally, we'll need get item dropped. Okay, so we can see there are a few errors here, and I don't know why this one just shows the question marks. Same thing with that one. This one will say not annotated method overrides method annotated with methods return non-null by default. So there are two ways to fix that. One is to add a non-null annotation, and that will get rid of the warning. And that is just a warning, so you don't need to fix it, but let me actually... What I normally like to do is add a packageinfo.java file. And in here we can just add methods return non-null by default, and parameters are non-null by default. And you add those above the package name when you're editing a packageinfo.java. And that will basically apply those annotations to any class in this package, so you can see that got rid of all the warnings here. So not necessary, but I have a lot of warnings enabled just to kind of look for little stuff like that. So let's actually implement these methods. So let me see. So for to get experience, I think I'm just going to copy it from this other file and make sure that everything there makes sense. Probably going to have to make a little bit of a change to it. That one method call here, I'm going to replace with mathhelper.nextInt random 1 to 5, so give 1 to 5 XP. I believe that's inclusive. Yes, that should be 1 to 5 inclusive. So this is another kind of useful class. It's Math Helper, which is found in vanilla Minecraft. It has a few useful methods in it. One in particular is called clamp. So there are versions for a few different numerical types here, so clamp methods are very useful. Just a little shortcut, but handy. And I think everything else here is fine. So what it's doing is just making sure that the item the ore is dropped is not equal to itself. So for example, if we're using Silk Touch, we don't want to drop XP. So for get harvest level, in this case, I'm just going to return 2, so it'll require an iron pickaxe or better. And for get item dropped, we're just going to return dropped item. And that should be all we need to do for this, so now let's actually create the instances of it. So again, going to use a lazy load base, and this time we're going to be using our ore block class. And could just call it ore. I'll go ahead and call it ore block, just because it kind of lines up better with everything else. So new ore block, and we can just pass in the item we want to drop. So in this case, it will be this dot get item. Actually, would it be better to pass in the method reference like that? Yeah, okay. So now let's add ore block, get ore block, and just return ore block dot get value. Now we need to register the blocks in mod blocks. And we could do it in the same loop. The problem with that is that it will group everything by the gem instead of by the block type, which normally I group by the block type. So yeah, let's go ahead and just write another loop here. And in this case, our block is going to be gem.getName plus underscore ore, and getting the ore block. And the names of those will be ruby ore, sapphire ore. Okay, and that should be all we need to do here. So let's try running it again. Okay, and I saw that the block state files failed to load. What went wrong? Ah, okay. Just a small error there. Okay, never mind. It seems that I copied the wrong files into block states, so okay. Just fix that really quickly. Somehow I ended up with the block models. Okay, maybe that'll work. Anyway, if you're curious, the silence gems enum looks something like this. You can see there's a lot of constants, and I'm passing in a few parameters for them as well. And here you can see all the different blocks, then all the items. And then I'm also storing some tag references, which I'm not sure how much I'm actually using those. So I'm sure you can imagine how much easier this makes everything. So that's how many different blocks? 12 different types of blocks times 48 gems is a lot of blocks. It'd be a pain to type all those out by hand. Alright, finally. So I'm going to give myself an iron pickaxe and a stone pickaxe. And I haven't shown our item group yet, so because some of the blocks have been added after the world's been created, they're kind of in a random order. It's a little bit unfortunate. Okay. So now we should be unable to mine these with a stone pickaxe. Should be. Not sure what went wrong there. But they are dropping the correct item at least. Okay, I'm not actually sure what went wrong with the harvest level. I'll see if I can fix that later, but I'm out of time to record right now. So thank you for watching. Next time we'll cover tags and recipes. I'll see you then.